Each one offered for the other. Each one was the supporter of the other. So in that context, let's look at that example and let's look at those relationships. And in this slide, talking about Hassan alayhi salam, who today marks his actual birth. So Imam Hassan alayhi salam, very briefly, is the third Imam. He was born in Medina on the 15th of Shahr Ramadan Mubarak, and he was the elder son for Imam Ali alayhi salam. Now Jalal, when Imam Hassan alayhi salam was born, there was a lot of joy and happiness that was brought to the household of the Prophet.
Now, we're all tired, and I know Sayyid just misspoke. I've heard people saying second. Yeah, we all know this. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam being the second Imam alayhi salam. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, being born in Medina, and being the first son of Lady Fatima alayhi salam and Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, the Imam, his birth was very significant, and especially through the eyes of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, he was one of the first people for Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam to actually see when he was born. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited the adhan and the iqama in the ears of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam when he was born. And he looked at him, and he was the one who actually named him. And he looked at him and he said, "What a beautiful child. I shall name this child Al-Hassan," right? And automatically, and from that point, you see a relationship, a connection between the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the Imam Al-Hassan alayhi salam. And this relationship goes on also with the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, our third Imam. Now, when we see this relationship, it's not just one of a grandfather and his children. There was truly a relationship of closeness, a relationship where the Imams, at their very young age, they followed the Prophet. They went along with him wherever he went. They were always in his company. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized that wherever he would go, he would want his children. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ said that these are my children. That he endeared them more than just a grandfather to a grandchild, but looked at them as his own very children. Now, when we look at this, beyond just that relationship that they had from such a young age, and Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam emulated the Prophet in every single way. Emulated his father Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, who was the supporter, the backbone of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in these coming nights, inshallah, coming up to the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam, we're going to be discussing more about the history of this individual who is the commander of the faithful, the individual that we look towards for guidance after the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the one who kept Islam intact, the one who protected the message of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. When we look at Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, we see this pure and perfect example of following the message of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, even in difficulty. Now going in this, we see one of the characteristic things, and this is characteristic of all of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and characteristic of, by the way, when we mention Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, it's not Ahlul Bayt as a separate entity. Ahlul Bayt is non-existent and is not even a word to be said in our connotation, in our reference, without the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So, just so we realize, whenever we say Ahlul Bayt, it is Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. So with this, realizing Ahlul Bayt, the top of them, the root of them being the Holy Prophet ﷺ, we see a characteristic of a life of hardship and trial and tribulation. Why? Usually we see something, and this is even from the non-Islamic perspective, being from a secular perspective, when you look at many people, many individuals that are experts in leadership, right? You look at individuals that have written books upon books and theses on the art of leadership in itself. Usually the individuals, and this is a common theme, a common principle, the individuals that are greater in leadership, whether it be in corporate America, it be in nonprofit organizations, it be in any business, the people that are greater in leadership are usually the ones that are greater in their sacrifice and their trial. the greater the sacrifice, the greater the trial, the greater the tribulation, the more they go up ranks in leadership. So we see this, if the Holy Prophet ﷺ is the most perfect human being that ever walked this earth, being khayru khalqillah, the greatest of creation, the one who is a mercy to mankind, the best man to ever set foot on this earth, in his message, in his character, in his conduct, in everything that he ever did, and his holy family following him in that same very suit, we see that this is accompanied by that tribulation and by those trials and hardship.
Now Imam Hassan alayhi salam, like all of the other Imams, just like Jalal just alluded to, faced hardships. From a very young age, growing up, becoming an adult, he faced one hardship after the other, one struggle after the other. Some of the major hardships that he faced during his life was witnessing the death of his grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who refers to Al-Imam Al-Hassan and Al-Imam Al-Hussein as Sayyidi Shabab Ahlul Jannah, the masters of the youth of paradise. Then he witnessed the tragedy of the martyrdom of his mother, Lady Fatima alayhi salam, who was killed and martyred in a very brutal and savage way. And then after that, the tragedies continue, the hardships continue. Whether it's the usurpation of the caliphate from his father, Al-Imam Ali alayhi salam, who was the rightful and deserving candidate for the caliphate, for the leadership. And then also the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and continuing on and on and on. But the character that the Imam portrayed and demonstrated at all of these different stages, facing all these calamities and facing all these hardships, was the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That regardless and irrespective of how hard and dire the situation was, that his character was consistent and was constant. That he was respectful, he was merciful, he was generous. By the way, that's one of the qualities that he's known for. Kareem Ahlul Bayt, which is that he was known as the generous one. That he always stood for the truth. That he rejected wrong. Now Jalal, when the Imam alayhi salam, and Imam Ali alayhi salam, the commander of the faithful, passed away, Imam Hassan alayhi salam was next in line as the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And he was the deserving leader of the time. But the Imam, even with that, faced a lot of obstacles and hardships.
So at the death of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and we see, and inshallah in the coming nights we'll speak a little bit more about the history between Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and the rise of Bani Umayyah, and the rise of Muawiyah and essentially the kingdom that would come as Bani Umayyah. So when we look at that, we see that from the very onset, you have this conflict taking place and this challenge moving forward from Abu Sufyan being the father of Muawiyah. And Muawiyah, and relating this back to Karbala like we mentioned earlier, Muawiyah being the father of Yazid. When Imam Ali alayhi salam, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When Imam Ali alayhi salam passed away, when he was martyred, Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam was the next rightful leader after the Imam. Now, Muawiyah had, by this time, after 30 plus years of the passing of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, had gained a stronghold in what was known as Ash-Sham, Greater Syria. And at this time, Muawiyah outwardly wanted to take on the caliphate for himself. What would be the leader of the Islamic Ummah, the Islamic nation. And he outwardly wanted to battle and fight against Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. And no, this came after what? After battles that were against Imam Ali alayhi salam, who Imam Ali alayhi salam was martyred when he was the caliph of his time. So in this situation, Muawiyah, after losing the battle of Siffin against Imam Ali alayhi salam, wanted again to challenge Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam and wage another war. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam stood and defended the principles. Now there's a big misconception about Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. And unfortunately, many of us who claim to be lovers of Ahlul Bayt, followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, followers of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family, we neglected Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam in too many different ways. automatically we jump from Imam Ali alayhi salam and we jump to Imam Hussein and then continue on with the rest of the Imams. Thinking that Imam Hassan alayhi salam was not an individual of bravery, of courage, and of stance of justice. Know that Imam Hassan alayhi salam fought against Muawiyah and his tyranny. The situation, however, was different. And we see that from the principle of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that Al-Imam al-Hassan wal-Hussein, they are imama. Whether they sit or stand, they are imams over the people. They are leaders over the people. Now we see the situation was very different regarding Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam with Muawiyah. At that time, Imam al-Hassan was continuously betrayed by the people within his own ranks. So much so that when the battle actually took place between the forces of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam and the forces of Muawiyah, so many people were bought, so many people were blackmailed, so many people were basically moved to the other side. So much so that within the ranks of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, in the battle, he was stabbed in his thigh by his own people, by his own soldiers. Now at that point, when you had the ferocity coming from Bani Umayyah, from Muawiyah, and the people that were losing so much morale, and people were falling from the ranks so easily, one after one, actually I would say 1,000 after 1,000, the Imam had to make a decision. And the Imam in his wisdom decided to do something that was long term. Because when the Imam decided that this battle is going to go on no longer, and that a treaty were to take place with Muawiyah, some people say, how could Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam make a treaty with Muawiyah? How could that happen? The Imam alayhi salam did something very strategic, in that by making a treaty with Muawiyah, one, that the Shi'ia of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the people who followed Imam Ali alayhi salam, were not to be killed or persecuted. Two, that the people, the Caliphate would not go on to anyone after Muawiyah, anyone from his lineage. So it would not go on to Yazid, right? Because this essentially was a battle of what? Muawiyah wanted to say, I'm going to claim, I'm going to be the leader. I want this leadership. And we know Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, there were sacrifices upon sacrifices. The Imam stopped the battle, and one of the individuals came and he said, so I'm going back into the history. One of the individuals from the Imam's rank said, why are we stopping the battle? Why are we not continuing? After the Imam got stabbed in his own leg by an individual who was within his ranks. He said, we can continue to move forward. The Imam told him, if we continue this battle, he said, I am the first, and you see me at the head of the ranks. I am the first that would like to continue and defend justice and our principles. But if we are to continue, there will be no one left to call himself a true follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we see this wisdom of the Imam. He set forth on that note, had to sacrifice, had to look long term. And he made that treaty with Muawiyah, knowing that what? That Muawiyah would not abide by any single one of those issues in the treaty, of those promises in the treaty. Now say, beyond that, what do we see the effects of that in that situation with Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam and Muawiyah?
So there's a few principles here. There's a few reasons that drove and inspired that treaty. Number one, as Jalal mentioned, that the Imam alayhi salam was concerned about massive, non-stop bloodshed if there was war to be waged and carried on between Muawiyah and Imam alayhi salam. So that's the first issue. And here you have to see where the Imam is coming from, the lens that he's looking through. The first thing that he was looking through was looking at the power forces in that situation. And he knew that if war was to continue, that there will be massive bloodshed, and the only victor that would come out from that were external forces that wanted to attack the religion of Islam and the Ummah at the time. And he didn't want those individuals and those groups to capitalize on the struggle that was between him and Muawiyah. That was one issue. The other issue is that he knew that he didn't have many supporters. There were only a few loyal Shi'a of Ahlul Bayt, and he knew that if the war was to be carried on, that these Shi'a would be killed and the followers of Ahlul Bayt would be extinct, they would be wiped out. So that's something that he had to think about, which was, how do I continue to carry on my message through loyal supporters? And he needed those loyal supporters to continue. And also, another issue to keep in mind, which is very important that some people won't pay attention to, is that with the treaty, Imam Hassan alayhi salam wanted to expose Muawiyah. He knew who Muawiyah was. He knew that Muawiyah would not stick and stand to the treaty, that he would violate the treaty right away. And he continued with that because he wanted the people at the time and the people to come to see that Muawiyah was a brutal, oppressive transgressor, that he was the farthest person from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most unqualified person to take the leadership of the religion of Islam. So by setting certain conditions, whether that Muawiyah would have to follow the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, or that the Muawiyah and his companions would not curse Imam Ali alayhi salam on the pulpit, or that the Shia would not be persecuted. By setting all these conditions and outlining them one by one, he knew that Muawiyah would violate them, that he would be exposed, and that the people would see the true reality, who's on the right path and who's on the false path. And in doing all of that, what's most important is that the Imam alayhi salam, Imam al-Hassan, set the stage for the next part in the story, which is for Imam Hussein alayhi salam to come and to lead a revolution that will live on and stand for justice in the stance that he took on the land of Karbala. And if it wasn't for Imam Hassan alayhi salam and what he did, then Imam Hassan alayhi salam would not have the platform and the appropriate situation to carry on his divinely inspired revolution. And there's someone that really put this in perspective, where he said that when you look at Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Imam al-Hassan, they are two sides to the same coin. One side, Imam Hassan alayhi salam was the leader and was someone that led the movement of the jihad of peace, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam was the other side of the coin, who led the jihad of revolution against the oppressors. So when we look at both of them, very simply, we look at two individuals that committed to the same principles, that fought for justice, but each one according to the situation and what was best fit for the time. But at the end of the day, what they did together as a collective was complementary and completed one another. So let's be amongst the followers of Al-Bayt that do not neglect the Imam and really give him or recognize and acknowledge the status that he has from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like all of the other great Imams. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, tonight we'll conclude with the part from Dua Tawassul, which remembers the Imam alayhi salam and Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. And the last of our words, the salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.